And, it's really sad that I went that long, not listening to myself, and really going through those type of extenuating circumstances to continue to check the boxes at work.
Okay, so I just wanted to start with if you could tell me what your goal was when you sat down to write the Restart roadmap, and is that the same goal you ended with after you were done writing it?
Yeah, so I think that the goal of this book, there's a lot of how-to career books out there. So the goal was to keep it entertaining, engaging, and with every single chapter, there to be actionable takeaways, which there are. And so that was the idea. So it's a guide for anyone that's rethinking their profession and making the slightest adjustments, like negotiating for themselves with their bosses within their work environment, or the most material move as far as like changing an industry, completely reliving your job. But I do it through engaging storytelling, and from my experience behind the scenes of unscripted television to in the offices of some of Wall Street's, Forbes' most powerful people. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, and this is an 8-step process that will help people do just that. And you might just use one step, you might use all 8, but it's a good book for that. The one thing I will say, another reason I wrote it is because I was, just like I talk about in this book, I was put in this ultimate ultimatum. I asked permission to go on the show. A lot of people wonder, like, how do you go on a reality show and have a real job? Well, the memo for me doing so, and the story is told right in the book. But then I'm put in this ultimatum, and this ultimatum really put me in the back of a corner. It was all stemmed from a PG-13 rated comment from Kaitlyn. And they said either restart your career in the bank and no more side hustle, no more interviews, no more podcasts, no more social media, nothing. Everything would have to be approved by us, or go restart yourself outside of the bank. And not only did I restart myself, but I built a company because of that called Restart to help people do the same, refine their career navigation and really work on personal finance. And I feel like from my stories, I can make an impact. And that's what I'm trying to do, just make the slightest impact for people to write their own story.
You touched on so many things that I took note on when reading the book, including the tone specifically. It really did feel like you were talking to me. It was like listening to an episode of your podcast or listening or hearing you speak out loud. And there's pop culture references in there. It's broken down in a way that makes sense, I think, to people who wouldn't necessarily feel like they are a career expert. I assume that was something that was important to you to kind of frame it in that way, right?
Yeah, so I wanted to make it extremely relatable. I wanted to give critical lessons that can be broken down in simple steps. But I also wanted it to be a book that some of this stuff could be boring. How do I get people to want to turn every page in a subject that's so important to what we do every day? And so that was one of the things, making entertaining, engaging, and a page turner. And one of the only ways to do that, I think, and one of the only ways to connect with people in a mass way like this book, is to be vulnerable and real and raw with myself. And there are stories in this book that I've never told anyone. There are stories that I gave my mom the manuscript and she read, and she's like, Jason, I didn't know that. And I wish you would have come and talked to me about that. So to create that type of connection with the reader, I had to be vulnerable myself with some of my positions and my struggles.
For Bachelor fans, there is some fun nuggets in there, including that letter you mentioned that you wrote. And I loved reading that. I thought that was so interesting. Why did you want to include that in the book?
One, I think it's interesting. People want to know how people from The Bachelor go on these shows. Two, I mean, you could tell I'm an analytical guy. I went back and literally watched episodes. Unlike most people, not to study how to make it long, but I'm sitting there counting how many people will go home each week so I can give my boss the probability of likelihood as to when I will return to work. And while I'm gathering this information, I'm simultaneously working with production to say, hey, how long is the first week? Oh, it's only filmed 3 days. Okay, second week. So I can now do the math. And the reason I include a lot of these tidbits is because negotiation, branding, imposter syndrome, there is a lot of managing relationships, managing bosses, a lot of aspects that people are doing every day. I learned to refine and I took a ton away from my experience on The Bachelor. And so while I give a lot of corporate America and corporate banking examples, I also want to make it relatable to those who enjoy pop culture, enjoy The Bachelor, that it can give you some context as to some real life lessons that I have taken away from this experience that I will use for the entirety of my professional world.
You mentioned that that comment that you were kind of forced to leave the banking world that Kaitlyn made on her podcast. Do you remember what? Can you tell me what specifically that was, and how do you feel looking back at that? Was it just the biggest blessing in disguise that Kaitlyn's unfiltered?
So I had a plan when I moved to Seattle. So when I moved to Seattle, I talk openly about money on my podcast, Trading Secrets. I think that every dollar earned and lost, there's a story to be told. And I was given a really good opportunity to move from New York to Seattle, and I did. And part of my plan, I think this is really important, before going on the show, I knew I was burnt out. I knew my time was done. And I really strategically figured out how much cash I could save from budgeting to give me financial flexibility to leave the bank and write my own story. And that was a 2-year process. So without The Bachelorette, I had 2 years in Seattle, and I knew that I was going to be leaving. Now, after I went on the show, I returned immediately back to work and worked for a year. And the show took, the company took full advantage of my little 2 minutes of fame, having me go here and go do that and go do this. And with a smile on my face, I did it because I felt indebted that they allowed me to go on the show. And then in Kaitlyn's podcast, Off the Vine, as you guys know, she has confessions. And the idea behind her confessions is to say, those people you look up to, those people you might follow, those people that put a smile on your face, those same people experience embarrassing moments all the time. And so when you come on Off the Vine, tell us a moment that makes you relatable. And so her confession was that the first time we hooked up, she had an orgasm from dry humping.
Oh my God. That
confession hit a lot of headlines and made its way back to the office.
Oh.
And that was one of the things that sparked the conversation. And that was one of the positions I was put in. And I'll never forget when I called my brother, who is a business owner himself. I said, Steve, what do I do here? He said, I have a friend I'm going to have you talk to. And he was a New York City attorney. He said, I've heard a lot of stories about bankers and areas in Wall Street. I have to say, this is the first story I'm getting where someone didn't say anything, and it was a consensual, clothed sexual interaction with a partner told in a lighthearted way.
Right.
So this is a first, but that was the story.
That is so funny. And I know it was only a couple months ago that there was something else and you guys were joking about it that was said on the podcast or something. And you were like, didn't think I'd get this notification today. And it was probably on usmagazine.com, but you guys laugh at it. And I assume Kaitlyn's unfilteredness is one of the reasons why you love her. So it all worked out.
I adore her for that. And Kaitlyn is open and honest and real. And that's what's led to so much of her success. And for me, I was ready to make that move outside pretty soon. I don't think I planned for it to be just that soon, but it all worked. The push you needed. The push you needed.
Speaking of Kaitlyn, you did include a quote from her. I did it very scared, but I did it. And I loved that. And I know you also put it on your Instagram. Why was that important for you to include? What does that quote mean to you? And what do you want people to take away from that?
That quote means to me that we get one life. We get one opportunity to achieve what we want. And fear is one of the number one reasons that people don't take shots, that they have their story written for them as opposed to writing their story. It's one of the reasons that people stay in careers and relationships where they feel stuck. And so Kaitlyn's message of do it scared, but do it is such a great testament to, I think, the way that we need to think about our lives from a professional, financial, and personal perspective. The only way we learn as individuals is when we give things a try and when we give things a shot. And the more information we can gain from every learning experience, the better we can customize what our approach should be to be on that road for happiness. And this isn't about making the most money in your career. This isn't about, building all that wealth. This is about finding happiness, because when you're happy professionally, you will be happy personally, and it will make such a greater impact on just your overall mental and physical health.
I'm feeling inspired. I want to go back to the beginning of the book a little bit, because it hit different when you talked about, you said you're an analytical person. You broke down the percentages of how happy you would be in like a 78-year lifespan based on how happy you are during the week of work. And I was like, oh God, like I like my job, but I know a lot of people don't. And that's just like a scary stat. And you talked about how some of the coping mechanisms ended up being taking Xanax and maybe relying a little bit too much on that at some points when it's in the Listerine packet and stuff like that. Why was that important for you to include and start there? Because I thought it was a really powerful way to like kick off the book with all of those that.
I think for my restart, it took self-examination right down to the bedrock of like who I was and what wasn't working. The problem is I lived most of my life trying to be the person that I was trying to be, something that the person in front of me, my boss, my client, my boss's boss would perceive as successful. And at no point was I dropping into myself to find any bit of authenticity. And what ended up happening is that I created this shell of a human, this shell of a person that was living my entire identity and my everything through what I was doing in my work. And as a result of that, I was putting so much pressure on myself to exceed expectations while being this thing I thought everyone was looking for, and wasn't it all dropping into who I was. And that led to a crash, and that led to me falling on my face. And I open up chapter 1 explaining about this massive panic attack I have in the middle of one of our largest meetings. And as a result of that, I went to go see a psychiatrist, because I knew that if I had to keep paying off my MBA debt and keep this persona of being a successful banker in the world of banking and achieving success, I couldn't show that weakness. And so my inner voice was literally having me face down on an executive floor's bathroom in a pool full of sweat. And I still didn't listen to myself. And and I got prescribed Xanax and propanolol. I kept it in, there's Listerine strips. I would take the strips out or put a couple in and put them in there so that, people wouldn't think that I was taking those, but I had it always with me just in case that panic did come to fruition, so I could camouflage that. And it's really sad that I went that long, not listening to myself, and really going through those type of extenuating circumstances to continue to check the boxes at work. And I think that while people, a lot of people that are working professionals may not have gone through that extent of career confusion and loss of identity within their professional career, I do think there's a large group of people out there that experience some sort of career confusion. And there's something, even if it's very small, about my story that will resonate and hopefully spark change in others, because so many people go their whole life without really getting what they want out of their career. And that's my story.
Yeah, it was, I thought that was a great way to start it. Cause I was hooked. I was like, oh, I didn't know any of this. And also I was like, who can't relate to wanting to not feel like a ball of stress all the time? Like that sounded like a horrible feeling to, for 10 years, kind of feel like you were maybe on edge or didn't know when the ball was going to drop and try to juggle everything.
Yeah. And I think it's like, listen to yourself, listen to your intuition and your inner voice. It will guide you, because if you don't, inevitably, like, you too will crack, you too will fall, you too will need the restart. And if you could proactively, find your answers and find yourself before you hit the floor of an executive men's bathroom, that is a good thing to consider.
Negotiation is another chapter and makes sense, talking about careers and stuff. What would be your biggest tip for negotiating advice? And could that apply to a Bachelor in Paradise scenario? Because I thought it was interesting to hear you. And I know you talked about it with Dean on your first episode of your podcast a while back about how to negotiate for Paradise, but also in general, like what is the tip you give people about negotiating?
I mean, in this book for the Restart Roadmap, again, these are stories that are from the Bachelor days. I talk about the negotiation. I'll tease this a little bit, but I talk about the negotiation for the Bachelor and one way that Colton Underwood out-negotiated and outsold us that I will, I mean, it was very, like, it was a tactic that I will always remember. I mean, he was, I mean, I think he would have been, no matter what, he would have been the Bachelor, but it was a good learning lesson for me. And that story's in the book. And then, stories about negotiating on Paradise are in the book too. And so both of those are stories that are worth reading in the book, but I'll give you high level tips, I think, for negotiating in general and they do correlate to the stories. You have to know what determines objective success in the person you are negotiating for. And you have to make sure that whatever value you are putting on the table that establishes your worth is connected to what that individual has to do every single day objectively to be successful. That is a huge one. And I think customizing your approach is a huge one, and getting market information is a big one. So this is why I'm so keen on talking about how much money you make, whether it's good or bad, because it gives you more information to go negotiate.
Yeah, I think it's genius. I think you get all those people trying to go to Paradise this season, they band together, they take a stand, they can maybe get some more money. I mean, right?
Yeah, that might get me in trouble, but yeah.
If they read the book, they can, draw their own conclusions. I said
but
it,
that kind of is the purpose of the entire process here, is utilize market information to make sure you're getting the worth and the value you bring to the table. So whether it be Paradise or your next annual review, bring all your information and go get what you deserve.
And people, you're Shanae, you bring something, you're Teddy, you bring something, but we need both of you there. So I need you guys to work together and give me good, entertaining television.
And now you got to get Aaron Clancy on the beach.
Oh,
I mean, after
100%.
Over Woman Tell All, that's my big thing. Got to get Aaron Clancy on the beach. I'll be tuning in for that.
I agree. You mentioned Trading Secrets. You cover a lot of business and finance, but no surprise, my favorite episodes are the ones about the reality stars and how much money they make. I love finding that out. What has been the biggest revelation or shock for you about someone's deal, whether it be an influencer deal or a salary on a show? What has been the thing that surprised you the most? Because you've talked to so many people already.
Two that surprised me the most on Trading Secrets. Harry Jowsey having his discussion of the $1 million plus he's made on OnlyFans and the $10 million he hopes to earn in a year. I mean, his story is just wild. Another one that blows me away is Rob Dyrdek and how he negotiated for his $125K per episode, but also placement rights. So he had ad placement rights in every single one of those MTV deals. Crazy. And in those deals, he was able to make millions in dollars per episode. The other thing he did, which is genius, is that he had a production company. And so he negotiated in his package that the show would then have to be produced by his production company. So a company that was doing thousands of dollars in revenue just based on that contract was now doing millions. And this is really cool because this is behind the scenes, behind the curtain of the TV shows. We can go right now to our television and turn on MTV. He'll be on there.
Ridiculousness is always on. It's always on.
Well, why do you think? I mean, they got to make up for lost revenue.
It's insane. It's always on. And I feel like once a year that graph of MTV's or like graphic of MTV's guide goes viral of like the month schedule. And now it makes so much sense. That's why we're always watching Ridiculousness.
I love it.
I did want to ask you a few other questions. I spoke to Kaitlyn shortly before she left for Dancing with the Stars tour. She said a lot of the wedding planning might fall on you because she was going to be on the road. Has that turned out to be the case? Is 2022 still the plan? What can you tell me about wedding stuff?
I have been in charge of what I would say is the wedding planner negotiations. We now have what we have locked in. We're on like the final detail that's getting all put together for our wedding planner. Ironically enough, it's the same wedding planner that Jared and Ashley used. Nice. And we were just so impressed at that wedding that it was really, really a good fit. And so when Kaitlyn gets back in about a week, we are going to start looking at venues here in Nashville. And ideally we find a venue we want here in Nashville. And with that venue comes a date. And the big issue with wedding planning right now is you have this perception of when you think you're going to get married, like Kaitlyn did in fall of 2022, and then you find your perfect venue, and with all the cancellations and pushbacks of weddings, it is getting pushed back significantly. So I think that we're just going to have to go check out the venues, but realistically, based on the information we have in the market, it might not be until early 2023 because of the pushbacks.
I mean, the wedding industry is obviously, like you said, it's in a boom right now for a lot of reasons, including COVID. Bringing it back to finance, is there something that has surprised you of how expensive it is that you really had no idea, or were you prepared?
If there is, now you really hit me at the core here, Sarah.
I'm sorry. It goes together, wedding finance,
Here's the deal. Any product in the planet will have a price tag. If you put the word wedding in front of it or behind it, that price tag, what I have seen, is a minimum of 3 to 5x. So it has been an eye-opening process. But one of the things with this wedding is that when Kaitlyn and I look at kind of like our life and our life's work, so many of her friendships and relationships are on the West Coast and in Canada. So many of my friendships and relationships are on the East Coast. And, our fathers have met, our mothers have never met face to face.
Oh, wow.
And my mother has never met Kaitlyn's father face to face. And so this will be a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to bring like our life's work, all the people that we love in one room in Nashville, Tennessee. And I think that's why we're putting so much attention to the detail.
That's going to be a party.
It's good. I mean, imagine that dance floor. You're gonna have people from like Dancing with the
Stars,
Nation. You're gonna have Buffalonians trying to like jump through tables like the Bills. You're gonna, I mean, it's gonna be something else.
I hope someone's got a good Snapchat or Instagram story or something for me to be creeping on. I did also, Kaitlyn is so candid on Instagram. She posted a couple of days ago about struggling with anxiety and stuff. You guys have been apart because of Dancing with the Stars. And I know you must be so proud of her in this tour, but what has it been like to go from COVID where you'd been together all the time, I would assume, to now her on the road and kind of, I know it's almost over, but did you learn anything from that? Are you just happy it's ending, or what was that like?
I think some people forget that like 6 months or so of our relationship was long distance, and so long distance. I mean, we were Nashville to Seattle.
I did forget about that.
What's funny is we are going back. It's like going back to the long distance relationship days. It's been, I'm excited. Let's just say I'm very, very excited. It's been a huge year for Kaitlyn, and a huge 2 years.
I feel like it's always a huge year for Kaitlyn in a good way.
Just killing it, like Mirrorball, Dancing with the Stars tour. She's got her podcast tour, and then she's doing filming with the show. And so I'm so excited to have her back for a little bit. But what's funny is she gets back, and then in early April, I'm going on a book tour. And so in the book tour, I'll be in New York City on April 6th, I believe it is, with Tyler and Matt. So that'll be fun.
Nice.
And then I will be in Chicago on that Saturday. I think it's the 9th. And I think I might have big grocery store Joe there. And then I know I'll be in Cleveland with Michael A. And I have some other stops.
All the hard hitters.
Yeah, I got Minnesota, Toronto in there too. And then my guests in Boston, and those guests are TBD. So as soon as she gets back, then I leave. But we as a relationship, we have only, I think, been on over 3 years. We've only been on 2 vacations that didn't have work-related components. And one of those was like right after we got engaged. And so what's really exciting is that when Kaitlyn gets back, we're taking one vacation in March, and we're going to Colorado for the snow. And in April, we have one long weekend we're taking and going to Mexico. And so from the snow to the sun, I can't wait to have a little vacation with Kate.
Amazing. Well, I have to ask you a question or two about Clayton. I know you've been watching this mess. What were your thoughts after that Susie conversation? I know that it was a rough one for everyone to watch, I feel like.
Yeah, I have no issue at all with Clayton being intimate through this journey with other members of the cast that are still in the journey. I have no issue with that. I have no issue at all with Susie saying, this is my line in the sand, and if you were if that did occur, you know what, it's not for me. Those are two independent discussions. I don't have a problem with either of those. What we saw based on his reaction is what I didn't like. I didn't love Clayton's reaction. In a moment of distress and emotional height, every human after the age of 18 can probably pinpoint a time that they have regrets for how they acted in a moment of distress and in a moment of emotion. And you could tell how much he cared and loved Susie, that I think he was just in a pure state of disarray. And in that pure state of disarray, he did not handle himself, in my opinion, appropriately. But what the beauty of this entire, I don't know one person that's gone through this show, regardless of how difficult and challenging their time was or how pleasant their time was, that they don't look back on it and have some life learning experiences. And while it wasn't Clayton's best showing, there's always more to the story, and this journey still continues. And I cannot wait. I will have the popcorn, and I will have Spain Sparrow's wine ready to watch the finale and after the final rose, because I'm excited to see the full story, hear the full story from him, and see how like he reflects back on that and grows as a person. And I honestly hope he ends up with someone and finds happiness. I got to know Clayton a little bit, just a little bit, before the season aired, and everything I saw was a really kind, sweethearted individual. And everyone makes mistakes. I think it's just how you learn and recognize those mistakes that will dictate like your self-work and self-development.
I agree. Who do you think should be the Bachelorette?
I think Gabby or Susie.
Yeah, depending on how this all ends.
Depends on how it all ends. I think they'll bring totally different things to the Bachelorette, but Gabby or Susie would be awesome. And I still would say this, Michael A for Bachelor.
I'm here for that.